Thanks for tuning in to episode 27 of the Group Ride Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Salmon, coming to you from Los Angeles, California. My next guest runs a bike blog called bikinginla.com. He is a mainstay in the biking culture of Southern California and knows a ton about the area. So let's hear from Ted Rogers from bikinginla.com. So Ted, one of the first things I did when I moved to California was try to figure out some of the local area blogs and Twitter feeds and areas where I could find out more about my new surroundings. And your Twitter feed came to the top of the list for me. I've been following you for a number of weeks now, and I've been reading a bunch in your blog. You've got a lot of interesting positions on what cycling means in California and what cycling means for cyclists and people who ride bikes in California. One of the first things I want to ask you about is, what is your history? When did you start riding a bike, and what made you take this path of wanting to get more involved in writing about bikes?
First one is when I started riding a bike. Of course, I rode a bike as a kid like everybody else. When I went to college, I went to a school in Bowling Green, Kentucky that was on a hill, and the first thing they said was, don't bring your bike because you can't ride it up the hill, which for most people, they were absolutely right. So sold that one. Wasn't until I think it was 1981. Ronald Reagan had just given the tax rebate where he sent every American $200 if you were a taxpayer to try and stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
So I had $200 in my pocket. And 6 months earlier, I had seen Breaking Away for the first time.
Oh, yeah, great movie.
And I was like, okay, that's what I want. Went down to the local bike shop, and they had this brand new bike, only been on the market for like a year or two, called Trek. I got the very first year of the mass-produced Treks. Rode it for at least 25 years, maybe 30, before I finally decided I needed to get a new bicycle.
30 years on that Trek?
Well, then I bought another Trek product. I bought a Le Monde. So I've been riding Treks since 1981.
Okay. That's all you ride?
It's all I ride. Wouldn't mind getting something else, but I've been very happy with what I've got.
Well, they do good work, that's for sure.
They do. And I still have that little blue bike sitting in my kitchen area, waiting for me to have the time and the money to fix it back up and ride it again.
Oh, wow. That's a project right there, though.
Like, I cannot let go of that bike because it's taken me too many places.
Yeah, don't let go of it at all. That's one of the things I hear people talk about. They miss their first bike. You can mount them to the wall, make it art, or you can make it usable again. You can get the parts now. It's great.
Well, it's like I told my wife, is that I'm never getting rid of that. You know, I've spent more time on it than I have you, and she hates that joke.
That's a pretty bad joke. So what type of riding do you prefer right now? What's your riding style?
Well, right now I am not riding much because of health issues. I had, for decades, I'd been strictly a road cyclist. My heaven, my nirvana is just to get on my bike and ride until my legs fall off. When I lived in Colorado, that meant riding out to the plains and just amazing experiences riding through abandoned grasslands.
Yeah.
Riding up in the mountains at night under a full moon when I'd be the only human I'd see for hours. Just amazing experience. When I moved to California, that was a lot harder to do.
Yeah.
Urban environment, but
right.
Still would find ways to get out on the open road and do, 30 miles for me was a short ride when I just was warming up.
Yeah.
I tried to do 50 to 100. And then, now that I moved to Hollywood, I was recruited to the board of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition about maybe 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I would take my car to drive from my place in Westwood to downtown Los Angeles for our meetings. And some of the guys on the board looked at me and said, "You are on the Bicycle Coalition. Why are you driving here?" So, over my wife's better judgment, I was able to talk her into letting me try riding with a group of friends to downtown LA. I found that it took me an hour to an hour and a half to drive there, find parking, and get to the meeting. It took me an hour to ride my bike there and not have to worry about parking. Just carry it right into our meeting room.
And you probably felt better when you got there.
Oh, I felt a lot better. I was more alert. I was happier. I might be, might have sworn at a few drivers along the way, but really got to enjoy it. And then reached the point where the other guys I was riding with dropped out, and I kept going without telling my wife, of course. Thank God she will never listen to this.
I'll make sure of that.
I just kept riding and absolutely loved it. And I got back to that joy I had when I first started riding, and my bike was less a form of recreation than a form of transportation. And now I do a lot more transportation riding. I'm limited by worry about theft. It's the hassle in riding, a mile to the store and then spending 15 minutes field stripping my bike, locking it up, go inside for 2 minutes, come back out, put my bike back together, and then ride home. It's not worth it.
So how bad is theft out here? I know in Seattle and Portland it is really, really bad. There's a corridor of bike theft that operates from British Columbia all the way down to the south of Oregon. That makes it really hard to have a bike in Seattle or in any of the downtown areas without having multiple locks and a big locking strategy and all sorts of different things to mitigate that risk. Is it similar down here?
It's from what I've seen, it's pretty much similar everywhere.
Okay.
But LA has a big problem with it. Long Beach says they've improved, which is surprising. They're the only place I've heard about where they say that bike theft has actually gone down. It's pretty much rising everywhere else.
Okay. In
downtown LA, if you park your bike outside without really securing it, it's gone. In most of the rest of LA, it's like if you use a cable lock, you might as well be inviting people to steal your bike.
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't lock up your wheels, kiss them goodbye. And a lot of that, you hate to point fingers at an unfortunate group, but the police are the first ones to tell you that there are a lot of bike chop shops run by the homeless people.
Yeah.
And they will take a bike and just strip it down, and the parts are gone for whatever they spend the money on. And you'll never see it again.
Yeah.
Then you've got the professional bike thieves who are usually after a little higher-end bike, and they'll take it, move it to another city, put it on Craigslist, and sell it.
Yep. That's exactly what we see in Seattle as well. How did you get into the bikinginla.com writing for a blog?
It pretty much started when I had what I refer to as the incredible beachfront bee incident. I had one of the gnarliest wrecks in LA history. Matter of fact, it's almost a year to the day, September 12th, 10 years ago. Got to celebrate the anniversary. I was riding on the beach, on the bike path along the beach in Santa Monica. And as I'm riding along, perfect, beautiful day, I'm just cruising, it's not even a work day, it's just an off day for me, as far as bike riding. And then I notice a bee. And then I notice a couple more. And all of a sudden, I am right in the middle of the biggest swarm of bees that I have ever seen. It's like I could not see anything in any direction other than bees. It's like the question is, do you turn around and go back? What do you do?
Right.
So I just figured my best solution is to just get the hell out of there as fast as I can, put my head down, started pedaling. Maybe 15, 20 seconds later, I came out on the other side. And it's like, oh, thank God I survived that. Start checking myself to see if I'd been stung, and I look down and there are bees covering my entire body.
Oh, man.
I remember feeling one walking across my cheek and swatted it off. I saw one walking across my goggles. And the next thing I know, a lifeguard was putting an oxygen mask on my face and saying, "Do you know where you are?"
So I'm assuming you got stung many, many times.
Not once.
So what happened?
I don't know. Complete blank. For all I know, Godzilla came out of the ocean, walked over, picked me up, threw me down, and then went back to destroy Tokyo.
I was going to say Aliens was my second choice.
Yeah. I mean, I have no idea what happened.
Wow.
From the injuries I had all over my body, it was pretty clear that I tumbled, I flipped a few times. I obviously hit at high speed. I was probably doing like 20 or more at that point. And it was enough to shatter my helmet, which I would never ride on the bike path that fast normally. Ended up with just injuries all over, road rash everywhere. If the light hits me right, you can still see a Hitler mustache scar on my lip.
Yeah.
So the lifeguards, all I wanted to do was get up and get back on my bike. You got that adrenaline going, and you can't feel any pain.
Yeah.
And they said, no, push me back down. Said, we've already called the paramedics. Said you've been unconscious for between 5 and 10 minutes.
Oh, jeez.
And you're not going anywhere till the paramedics check you out. So paramedics come, they check me out, and they say, you're going to the ER. And I said, no, I just want to go home. It's okay. I'll be fine. And they said, no, you're going to the ER. Fine. Funniest part of the story is I'm in the ambulance, sirens going, rushing down the street to the nearest hospital. Every day at 1:20 on my wife's lunch break, she calls to check in with me. This time the phone rang. I told the paramedics who it was, and one of them answered the phone and said, now, I don't want you to worry, but your husband has been in an accident and he's on the way to the emergency room, which, of course, is code for panic.
Right.
So took me to the emergency room, and, they were just about to let me go when one of the doctors looked down at my bike shorts and he said, do you have something in your pocket? I said, bike shorts don't have pockets. And he goes, well, I think we need to check that out. He looked down and I had a hematoma the size of a football on my hip.
Jeez.
If I had ridden my bike home, I probably would have bled out and died of a heart attack before I got halfway there.
Man.
So couple nights in the intensive care, and they kicked me out and sent me home. But I was under strict orders not to leave the house for a month and no exercise for 3 months. So I'm sitting there, I got time on my hand, and I figured, well, I might as well write about bicycling.
If I can't ride a bike, I'm going to write about them.
And so I wrote a couple of stories that I sent to the magazines and instantly got rejected. One of them got sent home unread. It's like, oh, thank you very much. And a friend of mine said, well, why don't you start a blog? And it's like, well, what's a blog?
Right.
So
how long ago was that?
9 years.
9 years.
It'll be 10 years next year. And I was just pissed off enough about the sad state of bicycling in Los Angeles that I started writing about it, thinking that nobody else felt that way. And the first thing I learned was that a lot of people felt that way.
Yeah.
My audience started to build. I actually, with all this talk about transsexuals in bathrooms, I owe a huge debt to the transsexual community because they were among my first followers.
Interesting.
There was a group of trans bike riders that started following me, and for a while they were as much as 50% of the audience that I had.
Oh, wow.
Without them, I probably wouldn't still be doing it.
Man.
But, it built from there, found that there are other people felt the same thing. I realized very quickly that I didn't know anything about infrastructure or bike laws or things like that, and I had to educate myself fast.
Yeah.
So I started reading all these stories online. I was like, well, if I find these so interesting and I'm reading them every day, maybe other people will like them. And it quickly became the most popular part of my blog. And, so we developed from there. But a lot of it stems from the idea that I didn't even realize this at first. It took me a while to realize my real motivation, beyond that anger, was that everybody wants to change the world. I'm one guy. I can't change the world. I'm not Gandhi. I'm not Mandela. I'm not King. I can't do it. What I can do is help make Los Angeles a better place to ride a bike. And that, by extension, will change the world. If a city like LA can become safe for bicyclists, any city can become safe for bicyclists.
Right.
And then we start getting people out of their cars and onto bikes. And maybe we can leave this world a better place than we found it.
Right. Ideally, you would leave with less traffic than you arrived with. Less traffic on the roads, less gridlock, less anger for having to transport yourself across, 20 miles, and it takes 2 hours to do so.
Mm-hmm. At this point, that's pretty much my only major goal in life right now, is to leave this world better than I found it. And the best tool I have to that is by bicycling and by writing about bicycling.
So on your site, you cover a lot of California-specific aspects of safety, infrastructure, laws. One of the things that is different from where I'm coming from, which is Washington State, to when I moved here in California, was the idea that you guys have a 3-foot rule. In Washington State, we've been trying to get a 3-foot rule for a long time and just haven't successfully done it. But California has a 3-foot law. Tell me your opinion about how well that law has been adopted and implemented.
What law?
Fair enough.
Unfortunately, it's been a real challenge to get police to enforce it. They have a valid argument that when a cop sees a car pass a bike, it's really hard for the guy in the driver's seat to say he passed at 18 inches or he passed at 37 inches. And I can see that, although if you're behind him, you can eyeball it and say, okay, he passed within arm's length. That's too close.
Right.
I don't know. I'm sure there have been moving violations written for violating the 3-foot law. I personally am not aware of any. Now, I have known it to be written up if there's a crash. And if a car hits a bike, he violated the 3-foot law.
Clearly, yeah.
That's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
So that's the main way they use it, is that if they lack any other reason to write a ticket in a crash, they can do that. I've argued with them. Memphis Police Department developed a device that uses radar to measure a 3-foot distance. And they'll mount it on a cop's bike, send them out to ride, and when somebody breaks that, it sends off a signal, cops pull the guy over and write a ticket for it. And that very quickly gets the word out, you've got to give a safe distance to pass. I have tried to get the police to do that without any luck. I've tried to get them to do 3-foot passing stings of any kind without any luck. Britain, a movement is going through Britain where they printed out these maps that show a 3-foot passing distance. And when a driver violates the 3-foot law, I think it's a 1.5 meter law over there, they'll stop him. They'll lay the mat down next to the car, and they'll say, okay, this is a 3-foot distance. Do you see how far away this is? And the driver will go, okay, I get it now. And they'll send them on their way without a ticket, but with an education.
Does that change behavior?
Too soon to tell.
Okay.
I've seen reports that in the cities that started it, that yes, it seems to be working, but to my knowledge, it's pretty much started about a year ago and is slowly moving across the country. So the jury's still out on what effect it'll really have.
Okay. When the law was implemented in California, did you see a difference in behaviors in general, or was it a non-issue for you?
For a short time.
Okay.
Matter of fact, one of the things that I do on my blog is I track bicycling fatalities in Southern California. Not because I want to, but because no one else was doing it.
Yeah.
Now with Vision Zero, LA is finally starting to keep those numbers. But when I started, no one in Southern California, no government agency could tell you how many people on bicycles were killed this year.
Wow.
They didn't have a clue because no one kept those numbers.
Not even when they actually, like, paramedics show up and there's an accident report?
Nope.
Wow.
And you could call them and they'd say, I don't know.
Man.
I think somebody died last year sometime. They just didn't keep the numbers. But what I saw when the 3-foot law passed, there was a massive educational campaign to tell drivers about this. Billboard, TV ads, radio, all of that. And what I saw was for about 6 months, bicycling fatalities dropped dramatically. Mm-hmm. And then once the advertising campaign stopped, they came right back up again.
Okay.
Which tells me that if you want to improve safety, education is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And it can't be one time and then you stop. I spent 30 years working in advertising. First account I worked on in advertising was like a Denny's. And we came up with this great ad campaign that they put all this money behind, and it boosted sales. And then they stopped running the ads, and sales dropped off. And they blamed the ad agency for not being able to maintain their business when they stopped advertising. It's the same way with bicycle safety. Is if you stop getting that message out, it doesn't work. You have to keep it up day after day, week after week, year after year. It has to be a constant message to drive safely, or people forget.
So the same thing would be true for the 3-foot law. You have to have constant reminders that you shouldn't be passing bikes too closely, and that the risk of getting a ticket shouldn't be the only reason why you don't do it. The risk of injuring someone should be the reason why you don't want to do it. You want to stay within the law, and you want to be reminded of the fact that by passing safely, you're making the road safer for everybody. Right. And one of the things that drivers don't understand is that the safer they make the road for cyclists, the more likely they're going to create more cyclists, which means less cars in front of them in traffic. That's and more parking, and all these different reasons why the gridlock would start to ease if more people had options that were not the car that they felt safer in doing.
Right.
Whether it be walking or riding a bike or even being on transit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I run into that all the time. You go to a public meeting and people will sit there and say, well, I'm too fat, I'm too old, I'm too out of shape, I can't ride a bicycle, I have to go too far to work. And what I try to tell them is that you don't have to ride a bicycle. If you make it safer and more convenient for your neighbor to ride a bicycle, he's not going to get in his car the same time you do, and he won't be on the road in front of you.
Exactly.
And people complain about bicycles being ahead of them in traffic and having to pass them. It's like, well, that could be a car.
That you can't pass.
Yeah, you can't get around, and you have to be stuck behind that person.
Right.
Here, it takes you a few seconds to pass a bike. He's behind you. Forget about it. And, I've had people just crazed with anger that they had to spend 30 seconds following a bicycle. And it's like, well, if that's the biggest problem you have today, you have really got a wonderful life. Right, it's like, right. I wish my problems were that small.
Right, exactly. Speaking of people getting enraged over bike-related things, I know that California, or at least specifically LA has been focusing on some areas of road diets and some areas of improving.
Can we back up from one?
Yeah,
because
yeah.
there was one thing we missed on the 3-foot law.
Okay, yeah.
Which is very important.
Okay.
The 3-foot law in California was passed on its third attempt. Well, it passed 2 other times through the legislature and was vetoed by Governor Brown. And one of the things that he vetoed was a provision that would allow drivers to briefly cross a yellow line if it's safe to go around a bicyclist. And because of that, that's in other states with no problems.
Yeah, Washington has that.
Yeah, all across the country that's allowed, but not in California. So he actually made it more dangerous for bicyclists because these drivers get stuck behind them when the lane is clear on the other side. They can easily see that it's safe to go around somebody, but there's that yellow line, and if they cross it, they'll get a ticket.
Right.
So they don't. Some of them break the law and do it anyway, and for those people, I'm grateful because they're doing the safe thing.
Yeah. But
it's just incredible that we can't get that until Governor Brown leaves office.
So speaking of drivers being angry about things related to bikes, I know there's been a lot of debate over the idea of adding lanes and adding protected lanes and reallocating space that's currently allocated almost exclusively for cars for other purposes, whether it be taking away parking or adding bike lanes or other road diets. There's been 2 examples recently that I've seen in the news for Southern California about areas where local residents would rather have more traffic because they make more room for cars to show up than they would to give room for bikes. What is your position on how residents of areas with high traffic should deal with the different road diet options that are being presented to them? Like, should they be giving up their parking? Should they be giving up their multi-lane travel to get somewhere really slow?
Well, it's a complicated question, and the first part of the answer is that some residents are upset. Some drivers who pass through, more pet drivers who pass through, are angry. Some residents are all in favor of it.
Okay.
What happens? It's a problem with our social media age that you get into an echo chamber online. The people that you follow in social media tend to be the people who agree with you. So if you are angry about road diets, you're going to hear from dozens of other people who are angry at road diets.
Yeah.
And you're going to think that everyone is angry about road diets. If you are in favor of them, you're going to hear from people who agree with that, and you're going to think, oh, everybody agrees with me. And the really hard part is to get out and listen to people other than yourself and actually listen to them. You can have a dialogue with them, but most people try to talk at them and say, oh, this is what I believe, or this is the truth of the matter. And you really have to hear the other person's concerns before you even respond to them. With the road diets like that, people have been so angry, they don't get that the road diets, in none of the road diets that we've seen so far, well, I take that back, not none, but we're talking in the road diets in Mar Vista on Venice Boulevard and in Playa del Rey, particularly on Vista del Mar, none of them were done for bicyclists. They were done in Playa, they were done to improve safety. In Mar Vista, they were done as part of the Mayor's Great Streets program, which is set up to bring life and vitality to neglected neighborhoods. Mar Vista, it's amazing. Some troll was trying to get to me yesterday on Twitter and started telling me that I know absolutely nothing about Mar Vista. And it's like, dude, I've lived in Los Angeles for 27 years, and in all of that time, I've ridden my bike through there, I've walked through there, I've driven through there, I've eaten at the restaurants, I've gone to the bowling alley. It's like, I probably know it as well as the people who live there.
Yeah.
But the idea is you've got this declining neighborhood, which shouldn't be declining. It's surrounded by residential areas. What was killing it is all the traffic.
Yeah.
What's killing it is that people didn't feel safe walking on the sidewalk, let alone crossing the street or riding a bicycle. So the idea was it's a 3-lane street, which is basically, or 3-lane street, 3 lanes on each side, which is basically a highway.
Yeah.
And wide lanes, which encourage speeding anytime other than rush hour. And even during rush hour, you'd have these idiots weaving in and out of traffic trying to get ahead.
Yeah.
So the idea is reduce it to 2 lanes in each direction, narrow the lanes, temporarily put in a parking protected bike lane, and let that make it safer to cross the streets. Like, an old person cannot cross a 6-lane street in 1 cycle.
Right.
They have a hard time doing it in 3 cycles, let alone 2. Make it safer to cross the street. Make it more pleasant to walk down the sidewalk. Make it more convenient and enjoyable for people who live in the neighborhood to get on their bikes and ride down to the ice cream shop, or ride to get donuts, or just ride their bike, period. But through that, bring life back to the community.
Right.
And it's something that's worked everywhere else. But the problem that we've run into with that one is LA DOT, I mean, in some ways I love them. Los Angeles Department of Transportation. They are working to do amazing things, but they communicate worse than any other government agency I've ever known. They have not gone to the businesses and said, I understand that with the construction and through this adjustment period, you've run into problems. But if you stick it out, studies have shown that your sales will increase as more people start walking and riding their bikes here.
Yep.
Talk to the property owners and say, you're going to have fewer commercial vacancies if you stick this out. Talk to homeowners and say, your property values are going to go up because that's what happens almost everywhere else where this has been done. They've left it to the bicycling community to explain that.
Right.
And we can't be heard over the people shouting. We can try to explain it, but they're not hearing us. And we keep saying, this is going to be better for you. Just give it time.
Yeah.
That's why it was set up to be reviewed in 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months.
Right.
And then again in a year. And they're not getting that. It's like, it's been here for 2 months now. My sales are down. I'm seeing more collisions on the street. I'm seeing more traffic on the street. It's like, well, you're going to at first, but in the long run, it's going to be better for everybody.
Yeah, it takes a while for people to get used to the idea of a road diet changes behavior, not results. And the results are what people see immediately and they freak out about. They see more traffic for the short term. They see people not adjusting well, and they see people not coming into their stores or coming to their places of business just because the road diet happened. So they're really reactionary. And as a cyclist, telling them just wait it out, it's hard for them to see past the ulterior motives they think we have. It's like, you just want bike lanes, or you just want an easy way to ride your bike. It's like, well, we want that, but we also understand the data behind what these bike lanes bring and what safe streets bring and what being able to cross the street means for your business and for your home value.
I'm not sure your microphone picked me up nodding right there.
It's really high quality microphones.
Oh, good. The other thing that that's not communicated is that the concept of induced demand. That if you have a traffic lane, it will fill with cars.
Yep.
If you add a traffic lane, you will increase the traffic because people will come out to use that traffic lane. But the inverse is true. If you take away a traffic lane, eventually traffic either goes someplace else or just goes away.
Right.
I was struck by an anecdote in the book by Sam Schwartz, former, I can't think of the name of the book, but former director of transportation or commissioner of transportation in New York. And he was talking about the removal of a bridge. And everybody said, my God, this is going to create this massive traffic disaster because this bridge will not be here anymore. And where are all these cars going to go?
Right.
And he said a year later, studies showed that the traffic just disappeared. It's like they didn't go anywhere. Just fewer people were crossing there.
Yeah.
And it's a really hard concept to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
And I can understand that people who have not studied this stuff don't get it.
Right.
And so it should be up to LA DOT to explain it to them. And until they do it, we're going to have these fights on every road diet.
Right. And every small city council meeting will have the people who want the wider lanes and faster speeds versus the people who want to be able to walk on the sidewalk and bike to their ice cream shop. All of those factions fighting against each other, as opposed to the traffic engineers being able to come with science and data to show which direction a community should go to get the most out of their transportation system. Mm-hmm. So,
and one thought there, we live in a world where you see it with climate change and things like that, where ordinary people think that their knowledge is greater than the professionals, the scientists, the experts.
Yeah.
I've butted heads so many times in the last few months with people who say, well, okay, the data that LA DOT presents says things are getting better, but I don't believe them because they're obviously biased.
Right. They have a reason to say they're getting better because that's their job to make it better.
And one guy actually challenged me when I was talking about the traffic engineers, that they know more about this stuff. He goes, well, did they go to school for that? Where do you learn how to do that? And I was like, dude, they are engineers. That does not mean they drive a train.
Right. So earlier in the interview, you talked about your worst day on a bike with all the bees.
Yes.
So one of the questions I try to ask a lot of my interviewees is about their best day on the bike. So let's try to figure out what your best day on the bike has been, and tell me a little bit about that day. Do you have a best
that's
day?
Easy.
Okay, perfect. Let's hear it.
That's easy.
Let's end this on a great note.
I talked about, riding in the mountains, riding in the plains.
Yeah.
Throw out a couple of, just a couple of pre-anecdotes. And good and bad. I was riding my bicycle when I found out that Bob Marley had died. I had just finished riding my bicycle. I ride my bike a lot. Just finished riding my bicycle when I found out John Lennon had died. I rode my bicycle when I shook hands with Ronald Reagan.
Oh, wow.
But the absolute best day on a bike, I drove... I was living in Fort Collins, Colorado at the time, which is now one of the top bicycling cities in the country, about 30 years after I left. Bastards. But I drove my car east to see the area where my dad grew up in eastern Colorado. He was from a little town called Iliff that barely exists anymore. And near that is the Pawnee National grasslands. And parked my car, took my bike off, and spent, I have no idea how many hours, riding my bike through the farm fields and the grasslands, which are unchanged from the days when I think it was 5 different Indian tribes used to go through there. And watching the hawks circling overhead, and the antelope and just everything. And again, you're in absolute silence other than the wind rustling or the cries of the hawks. And it's like you can almost feel the Indian tribes walking along the trail that you're riding your bike on now. Just unbelievably incredible.
That sounds like a fantastic day on the bike. How long ago was that?
Again, probably around 30 some odd years.
Do you think that area is still the same today?
It's a nationally protected parkland.
Can people still ride their bikes there?
Absolutely.
Nice.
Absolutely.
We'll have to send a
It
link
should
to them
be
in the show notes.
Should be unchanged now, and with luck, unchanged 100 years from now.
Right.
And there aren't many places like that where you can go back and it should be the same.
Right. Well, this has been fantastic. I totally appreciate you spending some time with me on this hot LA afternoon. If people need to get in touch with you or want to read more about your blog and your experiences in Southern California riding a bike, where can they find you?
You can find me on, it's called bikinginla.com. If you want to get in touch with me, you can also follow me on Biking in LA on Twitter, at Biking in LA. I have a Biking in LA Facebook page that you can look for. You can email me on my website. You'll find my email address on the About page. And I love to hear from people, especially if you disagree with me about something, because that's the best way I know to learn something.
Right, right.
And either I can educate you or you can educate me, or we can both learn something. So I'm love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Well, hopefully the listeners have learned
and
something.
And send money.
Always buy a t-shirt, right?
I wish I had them. That's next.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending the time with me today. This was awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to episode 27 of the Group Ride Podcast. If you want to check out previous episodes of the show, go to thegroupride.com and look at the podcast archives. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at The Group Ride Pod and on Facebook at The Group Ride Podcast. You can always send me feedback about the show at podcastfeedback@thegroupride.com. Thanks again for listening to episode 27 of the Group Ride Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Salmon. See you on the next Group Ride.